Tonight, we're going to be going over the different aspects of community organizing, starting at advocacy, going over what community organizing is in a global perspective, the steps of community organizing, the different types of community organizing. We'll go over case management, the different steps within that, and then we'll go over 10 practice questions to bring it all together to make sure the content makes sense. So that way you're able to walk into the exam, kick it in the chest, get the job done. Started from the top, advocacy in general is going to be the exclusive and mutual representation of a client and or cause in a form of attempting to systematically influence decision making in an unjust or unresponsive system. So stated in a less technical way, it's seeing something that is not quite right for the clients of interest and making the changes and adaptations to fill in the gaps of whatever gap exists, because the societal system does not always influence and promote the best possible version of society for our clients. So it's our job to be advocates to make sure they get their needs met. Stated in a different way, it's where a social worker is attempting to bridge the gap of what a client needs and what is currently being offered. So this could be evident in multiple different ways. And it's just us trying to supplement what is currently existing to make it better fit what our clients could actually need. We're attempting to address a system that does not work for our clients and at times actually works against what our clients need. And this could be evident of your clients trying to progress their process, they're trying to improve themselves, they may lose certain benefits or supplemental benefits, and it's kind of like an uphill battle for our client, but that's where it's up for us to advocate for what our clients need and try to help fill in that void. So at the end of the day, it's us trying to gather support, awareness, influence to help mobilize change for a client. And this is where a lot of times people get confused with community work and they lose their minds because they're like, Phil, heard community organizing and research, program development, all this stuff is kind of confusing for me. And it's different when it comes down to, and you think about it. So take a second to pause. It's like working with an individual client. If something's not working for an individual client, we're going to advocate for them and we're going to help bridge the gap of what currently exists and what they need to be able to get the job done. So out this entire session, just picture that we're working with the large individual client. And ways that we can help advocate for this is helping protest, rallies, educational seminars, lobbying, working with clients directly to get information to them to help them better represent themselves in some way, shape, or form. And for those that are repping and rocking with the acronym, the advocate category here is represented here. We, as the social worker, are giving the clients what they can need to better empower themselves. But at the end of the day, it's up for the clients to fight and exercise the rights that they are going to gain throughout this entire process. And the target population is often going to be vulnerable and underrepresented populations. Getting into what community organizing in general would mean, it's the act of engaging with a particular group of people, community, or organization to empower change. So we are organizing an entire community to get the job done. And where this can look like is bringing together different people to influence and promote a mutually agreed upon effort to promote or advance a particular issue. The key emphasis here is it's a mutually agreed upon thing. So if we think about an individual client, we're not walking into that person and saying, you need to do X, Y, or Z based on the fact that I'm an expert and think that is best for you. Community organizing, we walk into the community, try to help bring awareness to something, but it's up to the community whether they want to do it or not. So if you see in a question that you go to a community, they don't really want what you think is best for them, then you just shut it down and you just let your dreams and goals lay to rest based on the fact that the community is what is going to make the final decision. So during community organizing, we help to identify, coordinate, and promote the change or effort within this, but it's not to benefit ourselves. It's in the best interest of the entire community. So as we're doing community organizing efforts and projects and all of these things, we're not thinking, how could I benefit myself in some way, shape, or form? And I bring this up, and a lot of people are like, Phil, that's pretty obvious as social workers. We're not trying to exploit anybody. But at the end of the day, there are some social workers that aren't as ethical as you may think, and that's why people's license get taken away every single day. So there are two different situations when it could be going in community organizing. And the two types have multiple different things that could benefit the community in some way, shape, or form. And the social worker is going to kind of be the middle person within this process. The first type is bonding. Key emphasis on bond, because if you think of people that are bonding, it's likely people that have met each other prior and have a relationship, maybe active relationship, or it's somebody that you haven't really seen a whole lot. But when you guys get together, you can bond about things that you've previously experienced. Stated in a different way, it's dense social networks among social groups for people who are linked through direct ties. Key emphasis on direct ties because they are directly tied together in some way, shape, or form. So if you think of two people are bonding, which is typically friends or acquaintances, you're bonding on things that you guys have been through prior based on the fact that you've been directly tied together in some way, shape, or form. And a couple of examples of this is churches, small organizations, interest groups, slimmer focus in their efforts to promote change, etc. So they've had previous interactions and are related in some way, shape, or form. And if you've attended one of my study groups in the past, you may see similar people that you've seen prior, and you are bonding indirectly at this point because the goal would be to pass the exam. And you guys may be supporting one another, whether you know it or not, by attending the session and bouncing ideas or asking questions or even sharing your experience in some way, shape, or form. So that would be an example of bonding, or whenever you get together with old classmates that you had, or maybe you're going to trainings and conferences and you recognize some people there, you are then going to be bonding with it based on the fact that you had previous interactions within this. Why is this a powerful form of community organizing? Because if you've known someone before, you have the ability to trust and respect that what they're doing is the best of interest and allows for you to get the job done in a more effective manner. On the other side of the river would be bridging. Key emphasis on bridge. So if you picture a bridge, it's connecting two pieces of land or two pieces of something together. So it's loosely connected networks of large groups of people linked through indirect ties. So if you think of a bridge, let's say we have one side of a cliff and another side of a cliff. Without that bridge, you're not getting across to different lands. So you're not going to have different views and values oriented in the same project. So in bridging, you are bringing people together from different backgrounds and different interests and different areas in order to accomplish the goal. So these people may have not had previous interactions and they're unrelated, but are interested in promoting similar issues. So a couple of examples is a multidisciplinary team. So you may have a social worker, you may have a doctor, you may have a nurse, you may have a dentist, you may have an accountant, etc., all coming together. They're passionate about a particular topic and they're working together and putting their expertise together in order to accomplish a particular goal. Another example is my Sunday study group. So if you've never been in a Sunday study group and you don't really know the people within the study group, of course, I've utilized that example for bonding based on the fact that if you've been here before, you've likely recognized people's names or what they're kind of saying. Within bridging, if you're new to it, you are being bridged or connected with people that you would have not otherwise connected with if you were not in attendance because you guys have the same or similar goal, which is walking into the exam and passing it. Another example is a political group, etc. Anything where they don't originally know one another and they may have different views and values and experiences that could be beneficial for the project. We are then going to be providing a bridge to connect two people together. So, kind of a quick review on that. Bonding, think of people that are bonded together or they're bonding. It's where they've had previous interactions and they're catching up based on what they've known to be true. Bridging is connecting two people that would not entirely be connected if not for the project, etc. So bonding, people that have had interactions before; bridging, people that have never had interactions before but now they're interested in working together in some way, shape, or form. Let's get into the stages of community organizing. And then, as I stated at the beginning, picture this as being an individual client. Why? Because at the end of the day, social work is simply meeting people where they're at and allowing for them to become the best possible version of themselves by providing guidance and interventions in some way, shape, or form. So, the same process that you would follow with an individual client would be the same that you would follow with an entire community. So if you think about that individual client, the first thing that you want to do with them is to develop a reputation or rapport with them. Why? Because when you know people, you tend to trust them and you're more willing to be open and work with them in some way. Same thing with the communities. So the first step in community organizing is to develop a reputation and rapport with the entire community. Because if the community doesn't know who you are, the likelihood of them trusting you and allowing for you to infiltrate their social circles and systems is going to be pretty minimal. But if they know you and they respect you, they're more willing to be open and work with you collaboratively along the way. So, the ways that we can develop a reputation and rapport with the community is to get to know the people, such as the key leaders, influencers, and people who are impacted or influenced by a particular issue of interest. So if somebody that you know tells you this other person is good and you can trust them, the likelihood of you wanting to seek out that person dramatically increases. However, if you don't know who the person is, or no one's really telling you that they're a good person or have worked for you, you're likely not going to reach out to them because they don't have a reputation or any rapport with anybody. And this is going to be important because we need to get to know the community and for them to get to know us so we can work and collaborate together to improve the identified concern, issue, and or need that is of interest for the community. And the key emphasis here is to collaborate together because a lot of times when people think about community organizing or research or anything like that, it's like, well, I'm an expert. I have to go in the community and I have to tell them specifically what they need to be doing with and for their situation. However, we are at the same power level and we are going to be collaborating together in this way. So, common ways to do this are focus groups. And an easy way to remember what a focus group is it's identifying a particular focus by grouping people together and listening to what they have to say. So, a focus group is getting a particular focus of the community by having a group of people together sharing their concerns. One-on-one meetings. Why? Because the most effective way to get to know somebody is to interact with them directly. And if that person has a positive interaction with you, the likelihood of them telling other people that you're a positive person dramatically goes up. And word of mouth is one of the most powerful tools on this planet, which could lead to snowball sampling. Another one is participant observation. Easy way to remember participant observation is you become a participant in that particular community to get directly impacted by the issue at hand in order to understand what are ways that you can improve the situation. And as I kind of planted the seed before, snowball sampling. So picture a snowball at the top of a hill. And every time somebody tells you about somebody else, it gains momentum. And the more that snow and momentum you have, the bigger the snowball, aka the bigger the impact that your intervention will have on the community and the rapport that you have. So the main goal is to identify the strengths, resources, dynamics, issues, and the history of the community to establish rapport. Again, the purpose is to get some reputation and rapport within the community. Hopefully, it's a positive one based on the fact that if it's a negative one, you're likely not going to get past this step. So think about that individual client. Once they establish rapport and are getting comfortable with you, you then be able to identify the issue and or multiple issues of concern. Same thing with the community. If you're a trusted person, everyone says that this person's good, they can help us, they're positive, they're not like a negative person trying to drag us down and just exploit us, then they will be more open and willing to discuss things that they would like to improve. So at this point, this is where we're going to be assessing particularly what is of need for that community. So we work with the community members to figure out what change they want to see or improve. Key emphasis on they. Why? Because the community is the main driving force of any change that we're going to see in any way, shape, or form. So if at the end of the day you see during a question that you, as the social worker, is trying to tell the community what they need to do not pick that answer because it's not likely going to connect back to the question in the best way that it could based on the fact that the community is the main driving factor of it. Yes, we have experience and yes, we are an expert, but at the end of the day, the community is what's going to drive what we would like to see within their situation. So this is where we're going to gauge their interest or motivation in changing the identified issue and or multiple issues. Again, you could have all the sweet research. You can identify the most articulate rapport and reputation and identify all of these things that they could work on. But at the end of the day, if the community is not motivated or their motivation wanes off and doesn't really want they don't want to address it anymore, you have to lay it to rest, which is the most frustrating thing is you put all this effort, you put all this energy into it, but at the end of the day, it just fails to launch. And the main thing that we can do to help identify and assess particular issues is explore previous attempts at change or even current attempts to guide our efforts. Because if somebody is currently doing what you want to do, the easiest way to learn how to improve is to see what are the gaps within the process. And if it's something that's already been completed, we can tell the community, hey, we've been researching what was particularly done before. Here are ways that we can fill in those gaps and it not have a negative impact on you if it had a negative impact in the past. And that's why they have a sour taste in their mouth, etc. So the best way for us to identify the best thing to do right now is to see what was done in the past. No need to reinvent the wheel and to get ourselves exhausted even before the launch. So if you've established the rapport and identified the issue and or multiple issues of concern, aka your assessment is done, you are then going to move into the treatment plan. So in the individual client realm, it's the treatment plan. In the community realm, it's the goals and objectives, which is particularly just a different term for treatment plan. So within this, we need to identify the issue and or multiple issues that are of interest to the community and work with them to see what they would like to see with and for their situation. So this stage is to lay the groundwork to what the intended change or impact will have and how long it will take. Because previously it was just hearsay. We're just talking about it. It sounds really sweet, but this is where we start to put some energy and actual measurable things in place. So, goals are the overarching change the community organizing project will accomplish. So, if you think back into science class, it's going to be that skeleton. And that skeleton does not look like anything based on the fact that it's just bones. So there's nothing to this. So this is just the bones of what the project is. So for example, I want to help as many people as I can pass the exam. Objectives are the specific steps that need to be accomplished in order for the overall goal to happen. So the objectives are the action steps of how we're going to get the job done. So if you think back to that skeleton, the objectives are the skin of that skeleton because the skeleton by itself is just a structure. But once we start putting the objectives, aka the skin, we can make it look exactly how we want it to look in order to get some flesh on the situation. So the social worker identifies the resources, people, and length of time that they believe will promote and accomplish the overall goal. So this is where the social worker is going to listen to what the community wants. They are going to construct a treatment plan. And then the next step is where we are going to review it with the community. But this is where we utilize our expertise, we assess it, and we allow and identify a particular goal and the objectives that are possible for the community in order to start laying the groundwork for it. So this stage helps to bring to life what the intended change and or multiple changes are to help inform the community of what can be done to address the issue and or multiple issues. So this is where we collaborate with them and say, okay, so this is what you particularly want to do. Here are the possible resources and things that we need, so this is what it could look like over time. The next step is where we identify and mobilize specific individuals and create a task force team or task team. So in the individual client realm, this is where you identify all the supports within the individual client's life in order to help promote the change because no one can build something based on just their own efforts. So, in the community realm, this is where we identify the particular individuals that are going to help us carry it out and to help support the mission at hand. So, this is where we need to gather key members of the community to ensure that they are aware of the roles and confirm the goals and objectives. Again, in the previous step, we identified the goals and objectives, but the community is going to say, yes, this is particularly what we want to do. This is how we can get it done. You say you need all of these resources and stuff. This is how we can mobilize and bring it all together in order to get the job done. So we need to collect the feedback of the community to gain particularly what we want to do. So this is where they need to confirm this is what we want to do and provide feedback on how to amend it. So during this stage, community members can critique or change any identified issue and or multiple issues and or how they will be accomplished, aka the objectives. So this is where we kind of can make easy changes because we haven't put forth any effort into actually carrying it out. So if you think about it, this is like the Autobots coming together and saying, how are we going to defeat everything and how can we get the job done? People are saying, this is what I can do. This is what the resources we can contribute. This is how we can mobilize it. So this is where we try to get into action, but we haven't put forth and delivered any of it, the actions yet. The social worker needs to confirm that the community members, leaders, influencers, and or other people being affected by the identified issue and or multiple issues are okay with the identified goals and objectives. And if everybody is like, yes, let's carry this thing out, let's get the job done, we can do this, we can accomplish everything that we want to, that is when we develop and finalize an action plan. This is where all of those hearsays and all of those identified resources and stuff kind of get put in stone and solidified. So the social worker creates a detailed plan with steps, actions, and resources needed to accomplish the agreed upon objectives to reach the identified goals. Why? Because the objectives are the action steps, the goal and or multiple goals is what we're trying to accomplish. And this is where it's going to be super duper important to identify potential barriers to accomplishing the identified goal in the implementation of the objectives. Why? Because things do not always go how you think they will. So if we have some thought of some of the barriers that can come up, we'd be able to identify ways to mitigate it and or sidestep it when it occurs. And the important thing is to have forward sight of not having anything go haywire. So during this stage, we must enforce particular standards and procedures to guide the plan of action. So yes, we've identified everything previously, and some people get confused because it's like, didn't we just create like 3 treatment plans all in one? Well, it was a progressive thing. We created like a rough draft. The community confirmed it and said, this is what we particularly can do. And this step is where we put it all into action and we're about ready to get jumping into leaping. Why? Because the sixth step and the last step is to execute and evaluate the action plan. So this is where it's important because if we don't lay the groundwork prior to this, this step may fail to launch. Why? Because this is where we deliver the resources, services, and strive to meet the identified goals by executing the objectives in the best way that we can. Throughout this entire thing, we're going to monitor and amend any issues with the efforts and or plan to accommodate for any unforeseen issues. Again, not everything is going to go as planned, so we have to be able to adjust and adapt to whatever the environment or situation is. We also need to gauge whether the plan of action meet the goals and fulfilled the objectives. Did we execute the objectives in the best way that we know how? Did it meet the goal and or multiple goals? Or did we meet the goals, but the objectives weren't carried out in the best way? So now it's not a maintainable system. Or did we carry out the objectives in the best way that we could, but it didn't accomplish the goal? So asking ourselves, do we need to make any changes for future efforts if it still exists? Or does the community actually want to get the job done? So this is where we need to decide whether the issue is addressed. And if not, we may need to revisit a previous step if the community wants to continue addressing the issue. And that's the most important part is if the community wants to continue doing it. And as I said, if we're going to go back to a previous step, hopefully it's not step 1 because if the our efforts actually negatively impacted the community so much that they don't really want to be repping and rocking with this anymore, we probably had a very, very bad failed execution. So let's have a quick review of all the different steps to kind of solidify it. I'll provide an example as I go through each one to kind of bring it all together. So the first step is to develop reputation and rapport with the community. And this can be done in multiple different ways. So for those that know, I kind of followed these steps indirectly as I developed Fill in the Gaps, which is helping people pass the exam. So the way that I developed a reputation and rapport was getting on YouTube, providing videos and reviewing questions based on the fact that I collaborated with a lot of people or listen to what was difficult for people as well as what was difficult for me walking into the exam and trying to get the job done. So the way that I did that was like, this was really difficult for me. Let me put up videos and see if I can make it easier for other people, because I'm likely not the only person that is struggling with breaking down questions. And as I put out those videos, people were commenting, these are really helpful. I've never seen anybody do this before. Wow, this is really making a lot of sense to me. And as I did that, I had somebody reach out and say, "Hey, do you provide individual tutoring?" I was like, "I don't even know what that is. I'm just trying to help as many people as I possibly can." They're like, "Just reviewing questions like you do on your videos." So then that opened the door to offer individual tutoring for everybody else, based on the fact that once I knew that that was a thing that could help address the community, it was a thing. So once I had a reputation and rapport, because people were like, "Hey, this crazy guy on YouTube is making videos, helping people break down questions. It's just an easy way to supplement whatever you currently have." Then people that were repping and rocking with me in individual tutoring, they started passing, or people started passing based on my videos. So that was kind of like a snowball sampling approach of like, people were telling other people about me, and then it kind of grew. But as I was going through it, which is the second step, is identifying the issue and or multiple issues of concern for people, which was, hey, this exam is very, very difficult, or I'm an auditory visual person. All of the materials are just visual and tactile. So I really can't understand information unless it's presented in this other way. And every time somebody talks about the exam, it's typically negative. We don't really have a form that people are bringing positivity around this experience. So as people are saying this, I'm jotting it down and saying, how can I best meet the people that are within the situation? As well as somebody was like, hey, you're really good at individual tutoring. How about you start doing study groups to help us break down the information? Because the way that you're breaking down the information to me right now makes so much more sense. So then I was like, okay, well, if that's a need, I can try addressing that. So through that, working with it, it just grew from just the videos to individual tutoring to study groups. And then as it went on, and depending on when you found me or how long you've been repping and rocking with me, that is when I started identifying goals and objectives for this thing. So my first goal was to have 100 people pass their exams. I was like, if I could help 100 people pass their exams in my entire time of doing this, forever, however long it takes, that is enough for me. So then the objectives were, I'm going to post bi-weekly YouTube videos. I'm going to do individual tutoring as much as I possibly can. And I'm going to do a Sunday study group every single week to make sure it gets done. So throughout that, as it grew, it was like we hit 100, we hit 250. Then I was like, okay, what do you guys as a community want to make the goal? They're like 500 people. Okay, if we can have 500 people pass the exam, then somebody was like, hey, how about you do a 1 day course, or how about you start doing free study groups because we can't get really exposed to you. So then I started branching out the objectives to help accommodate the goals. So now it went from just YouTube videos and individual tutoring to the Sunday study groups to one free study group every single month. There's now 1 day courses popping and rolling. We kind of skipped the fourth step, and the fourth step is mobilizing and creating a team to get the job done, based on the fact that I'm the person that answers all the emails. I'm the one that records all the videos. I'm the one that edits all the videos. I'm the one that does all the individual tutoring. I'm the one that records and does all the videos. I'm the one that does all the study groups, the 1 day courses. I write all my questions. I do all these things, so that I kind of skip this. But developing and finalizing an action plan was, I need to make sure that I continue doing the exact same things, because consistency kills and gets the job done. Same thing with the community, because once you have that action plan rolling, you continuously are going. And the sixth step is to execute and evaluate the plan. So it's not like I'm like, yep, I'm stuck in my ways. This is the only way that I'm going to do things. Because every time I'm tutoring somebody, every time I'm doing a study group, every time I'm doing a 1 day course, every time I'm doing a video, every time I post a podcast, I'm identifying different things that people are saying of like, okay, maybe you're not explaining the information in a different way, or maybe you could provide more examples. Maybe you could slow down. Maybe we need more of this, more of that. So that's where it's a continual thing. So whether you know it or not, fill in the gaps followed this. And I didn't really know it until I started reviewing all of these different things to help people pass, and say, the most important thing whenever it comes down to the community organizing is making sure that your community wants it. So if people said, Phil, your groups aren't helpful anymore, your individual tutoring isn't helpful anymore, your videos kind of are waning off. They kind of suck. We don't really like you anymore. Get out of here. That is when I'd have to kind of shut the doors because the community would no longer want that. So that is what I mean is it's not up to the social worker whether the project should go. It's up to the community members. And same thing with an individual client. You could get all these sweet interventions, you have all this experience, but at the end of the day, if the community and or client doesn't want it, you can't really do it. So hopefully that was helpful to tie all the community organizing steps together, and not everything that you're going to do in social work follows it. Because as I stated in my example, I kind of cut out some of it because it's a one person thing, but oftentimes you're going to have multiple people if you're addressing an entire actual community. This is a virtual community, so it's a little bit easier to manage, but still kind of difficult. So let's get into the types of community organizing to show what all this can look like, not just in the steps. So there are three types of community organizing. And I'm a huge person that loves to manipulate words. So if you're like, oh my God, how am I ever going to differentiate these? Sit back and hopefully I can provide easy ways to get this done. So the first one is social action. Key emphasis on action. Why? Because this is where the social worker is going to put forth action to get the job done. So, stated in a different way, the social worker assumes that there's an exaggerated or disadvantaged group of people or segment of the population that needs to be organized to make demands of the larger society to get their needs met. So, this is where the social worker is going to put forth action. They're going to advocate, they're going to gun for people, and they're going to try and get the client's needs met in the best way that we know how. So this could be like us writing grants. This could be us marching on the streets. This could be all these different things. We are putting forth the action to get the job done. So when there is a lack of resources, lack of rights, and unfair treatment, we have to jump up and be advocates and voices of reason to make there a reason for people to get help in some way, shape, or form. And if a lot of social workers come together and we all advocate together, social action can be pretty freaking effective because it's a loud voice and people don't like hearing loud voices in loud situations. So they'll get the job done and put forth action oftentimes. So this is where the social worker believes that this particular group of people needs assistance, but the overall society is the one who should be providing the assistance. This is where we are demanding the government. This is where we're demanding all of these agencies to provide assistance for our clients based on the fact that there is a gap within the situation. The easiest way to remember social action is we are putting forth the action to get the job done. That will make sense as we go over the next two because they vary from the first one. The second one is locality development. Key emphasis on local. Why? Because the locals are going to be the ones that are putting forth the effort, and the social worker is not directly a part of it. They may join it, but the community is ultimately doing all of the actions within the situation, and the social worker is just kind of present. So, stated in a different way, it's a neighborhood-based strategy utilized to engage a diverse group of people and or stakeholders, people who are interested in it and are being negatively impacted by an issue, in developing goal and or multiple goals and is taking action to better their situation. So, locality development is where locals and or neighborhoods are trying to solve an issue for just their community. They are not advocating for other communities. They are focused on their local community in the particular situation. So the main goal is to develop a sense of collaboration and ability to address any issues that could impact their community. And again, it's important to remember locality development is focused on only improving their local area. So a social worker does not have to be involved for this to exist. Social action, if the social worker isn't putting forth action, it's not getting done based on the fact that the social worker is the one that is propelling the effort and action. Locality development is where the locals are developing their own situation, and the social worker does not have to be present. But if they are involved, it's oftentimes to help supplement what has already been happening or that already exists in some way, shape, or form. And the third type is social planning. Key emphasis on planning. Just as when we saw social action, this is where the social worker is going to do all of the planning, but other people are going to do the actions, not us. So, social action, we're the ones that are jumping into action. Locality development is where the locals are going to be developing what they think and executing on their own. Social planning is where we're going to do all the planning, but other people are going to execute the schematics and or objectives. Stated in a different way, the social worker will assist with making a specific change and or impact for an identified community. So it can include formal plan and or policy development for the initiation or distributions of goods and services or both to satisfy a need. So we are writing up a plan to impact the entire society. So it has a huge emphasis placed on the interest of the particular participating agency and or multiple agencies and the community that is directly impacted by the issue and does not hone in on particular self-interest of residents and a community. So it's focused on not just a community, but over a long span, but focusing particularly on vulnerable populations. So this type of community organizing will directly impact a particular segment of the community at large rather than particular residents of one community. And that's the huge difference is the locality development was focused on just one local area. Social planning is where we are planning to change an entire segment of the country, not just one particular community. So this type of community organizing tries to benefit the entire community and or world at this segment. So, kind of a quick review of all of them. Social action, key emphasis on action because the social worker is going to be putting forth action to get the job done, advocating for underrepresented or vulnerable populations because overall society is not doing enough to help them. Locality development is where the locals are developing and impacting their community in particular, not in the other communities, just theirs. And social planning is where the social worker is going to do all the planning to help improve an entire segment of the country, not just one particular community. And that is where locality development, the social worker does not have to be involved. Social action and social planning, the social worker is involved, but in different ways. Social action, we are putting forth the action on our end. Social planning, we are doing all of the planning, but somebody is ultimately going to be executing the plan, not us in particular. And the difference is, again, social action and social planning are closely correlated because it's trying to impact the majority of society, and locality development is only focused on that local community. So those are just easy ways to remember the types of it. And just other concepts that are related to community organizing are coalition and lobbying. So key emphasis on coalition is going to be collate because if you think of something that is collated, it is bringing people together to accomplish a particular goal. So if you think of a collated notebook, it's like a ton of sheets collated together because it has a binding on it. So this is where we are bringing groups of people together to accomplish a particular goal or attempt to address a particular issue and or multiple issues. So if you think back to our bonding and bridging, these tie into what coalitions and lobbying would be. Coalition would be bringing either bonding people together or bridging people together in order to have them collaborate together to accomplish a goal quicker than it would be separated. So if you think of a coalition of people, it's diverse people coming together and getting the job done in some way, shape, or form. Lobbying, key emphasis of lobby, you think of somebody sitting in a lobby, it's where people are sitting in a lobby and trying to influence policies in some way, shape, or form. Stated in a different way, it's the process of influencing public policy. It involves developing and implementing strategies to persuade people of power. So think of you sitting in a lobby waiting to talk to a person of power to persuade them to change something in order to empower vulnerable and or underrepresented populations to get their needs met. So a coalition could be linked to a lobby, but coalition is where we bring people together, try to speed up the progression of an issue in some way, shape, or form. Lobbying is where you're sitting in someone's lobby, waiting to talk to the person of power to persuade them in some way, shape, or form. So those are all the different aspects of what community organizing could be. So we went over bonding, which if you think of two people that are bonding, it's bringing people together that we've already had interactions together to start working together. Bridging, think of two different sides of a cliff. If there wasn't a bridge in the middle of it, they would have never met. But since we are bridging, we're bringing powers together to accomplish things in a different way. And we went over the different steps of community organizing. We're establishing that rapport. We're assessing their particular needs. We're identifying the goals and or objectives of what they would like to see. We're mobilizing that team together to get the job done. We're finalizing an action plan and looking for the barriers and things that can get in our way. And then we're going to execute and evaluate to see if we accomplish the goal by carrying out the objectives. And if the community wants to carry on, we went over the different types of community organizing, social action, key emphasis on action, because the social worker is going to be putting forth action to get the job done. Social planning, which is where the social worker is going to do all of the planning and someone else is going to carry it out. And the key emphasis there is they are doing planning to help an entire segment of the country and locality development, key emphasis on local, because the locals are going to do it all on their own and it's only there to impact their particular segment of the community. And then coalition, we collate diverse people together in order to accomplish a goal in a different way. Lobbying, we have somebody sitting into the lobby waiting to talk to the person of power to promote change in some way, shape, or form. Let's segue into case management, what it means, the different phases, and then we'll get into the practice questions to bring it all together. So, case management is the process that seeks to advocate for and monitor services to help empower and improve a client's situation to reach the highest level of functioning possible. And if you remember when I was describing individual client work and community work, this is exactly what I was saying. Social work at the core of it is helping to empower and improve a client's situation to reach the highest level of functioning possible. So we went from community and what that looked like. Let's examine what it would look like on an individual scale. So this is where social workers try to limit any barriers or obstacles in the ways of a client's needs and or wants. So the main goal for case management is to optimize the client's functioning and well-being by providing and or coordinating services in the most efficient and effective manner. So we try to strengthen development, problem solving, and coping capacity. We try to increase the availability of community involvement within a client's situation. We try to increase the scope and capacity of the service delivery, and we attempt to contribute to an increase of access to services and level of functioning for the person. So that's the overarching goal of what case management is. Let's look at the phases of it and how it can progress and how a client can progress down the continuum of what it would be. The first phase or first step is an intake and or screen. So key emphasis on screen. Why? Because if you think of an outside of a house, this is them trying to look through the screen door to see if we can open the door to services for them. This is where a lot of times people get mixed up because they're like, well, in my agency, it's called an intake, and an intake means da 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 da. Do not allow for your personal experience to impact what the jargon or lingo is on the exam and or textbook. So in the first phase or step, it's them looking through the screen door to see if we can let them in. And what that looks like is it's a process of reviewing key information related to the client's situation to help determine what a client wants to gain and what they can actually gain from services. So if somebody is screened and they wouldn't really benefit from services or their needs wouldn't warrant services, then we're not going to let them in the house, aka through the screen door. So at the end of the day, the intake slash screening is the initial interaction where a social worker will identify areas of interest in the appropriateness of treatment. So at this moment, if you see it's a first interaction with the client and it's relating to the phases of case management or steps of case management, it's always going to be the screening. Regardless of the information being gathered, it's the initial interaction. So the social worker will try to determine what the client's needs and what they want to benefit from or what benefit they can get from services because they can identify needs. But if we can't particularly help them, we're going to have to refer them out to somebody that can actually do so. And at the end of the day, the social worker will begin to identify useful resources within their agency and or at other agencies to best address the client's needs and or wants. So the first phase is to simply see, do you qualify for services? Can we open the screen door and let you inside the house? Once they pass that and we're like, yep, we can let you in the house, we're then going to do assessing or conducting a needs assessment. Key emphasis on assessment. Why? Because this is where we are going to be assessing someone by completing a thorough integrated biopsychosocial assessment in order to continue to see what particularly the client is bringing in. Stated in a different way, this is a continuation of the data collection completed during the first stage, aka the intake and or screening phase. So this is a more in-depth exploration of the client's situation, and since we need to effectively assist them, they are a client at the agency now. So the intake and screening phase, they are not actually a client, but during the assessing and assessment phase, they are a client based on the fact that we're gathering information because we can help them and or we've sent them to somebody else that would be conducting this assessment. So this is where a social worker will gather information on the following areas about a client: past and current health status, so like what's their physical health look like, previous treatment history, have you received treatment in the past? If so, what was it like? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? What's your socioeconomic status? Do you have employment? Do you need help filling out benefits? Are you going to get on disability, SSI? Do you need help with employment, etc.? So we're getting to know how much money they're making. Are there ways that they can make money? Stuff like that. We're looking at the substance use history. Have you utilized alcohol and drugs in the past? Are you currently utilizing alcohol and drugs? Just to gauge what in particular they're coming in with. So that way we can be aware of it. Do they have any legal histories? Do they have current legal problems, etc.? Do they have any mental health symptoms? If so, what mental health symptoms do they have? Do they have any risk factors? Do they have protective factors? What's their housing look like? Do you need additional housing services? Do you have stable housing? What's your transportation look like? All this different information it's not an exhaustive list, but a beginning because we are completing an integrated biopsychosocial assessment or an IBA. It's the first thing where we get to know everything about a client. What are you bringing in? What can we do to help you? So that way we can have a thorough understanding of what is being addressed at this moment. So the goal is to get an understanding of the client and how we can best supplement their current strengths and resources to get them to the best possible functioning. Again, that is the overall goal, is to get them to the best level of functioning that they can. So the primary goals of the assessment are identifying a baseline and what the client's needs and or wants are. So if they do make progress, we know how much progress they've made. We're gathering information on the available services and resources and strengths that the client has and what additional things they may need to help them get to the best possible functioning. So as we've gone through the first two, the first one is the intake and or screening to see if they can get into the screen door. And if they can, we then start assessing what particularly they can need. And after we do that, we are then going to develop a plan of action of how to get this done. So, key emphasis on plan. Why? Because this is where we start planning to see what in particularly they can do or what we can do to help them get there. Stated in a different way, is when the social worker and client develop a treatment plan to help the client meet their identified needs in the situation. And if you remember back into the community, it's the same for the individual client. So the goal is the measurable overall need and or multiple needs and wants and or multiple wants that the client would like to accomplish within that situation. So the goal, that overall thing, picture that skeleton in the science class. They're not really sure what they would want to do within their situation. So it's the overarching need and or want the client would like to see in their life. And the objective and or multiple objectives is the skin to fill in the gaps of the skeleton, to put flesh on it to make it look like they would want it to look. So these are the specific and measurable actions to help the client get their identified needs and or wants met in some way, shape, or form. So after we develop that treatment plan, we then can get into the next step, which is implementation or implementing. So this is where we put the rubber to the road and we start getting some traction within the situation and seeing what they can do within their situation to improve the functioning that they have. Stated in a different way, it's the delivery or execution of the plan that the client and the social worker identified in the planning phase. So this is where we're just simply carrying out the objectives to hopefully accomplish the particular goal and or multiple goals that the client has. So this is where the identified objectives are being introduced into the client's life to help them reach the best level of functioning. And the social worker will organize, integrate, and coordinate the service delivery as needed for and with the client in some way, shape, or form. So this phase allows for the client to have self-determination and independence within their situation to help promote the identified change. This is where they are actually putting forth effort and action to improve their situation in some way, shape, or form. After all that happens, we can then move into transitioning. So if you think of a transition, it's that middle period of action and kind of reflecting in this certain situation of what we'd like to see. So after somebody has done the implementation or jumped into action, there may need to be a transition of higher level of care or lower level of care. So this is the phase where the client will be prepared for discharge, transferred to a different level of care, or have a continuation of their current level of care. So it's all dependent on what has happened during the implementation phase. So if somebody made progress, they may go to a lower level of care or get discharged from services successfully. Or if it didn't go as well and they need more services and there was more things that we didn't identify previously, and they may go to a higher level of care to help supplement that, and or they may stay at the same level of care and just need more time and exposure to get the job done. This is where the goals and objectives will be reviewed and the appropriateness for services and treatment will be determined. At the end of the day, the goal and or multiple goals is what we are trying to achieve. And again, the objectives may have to be amended based on the person's needs and or the progression of what this is like. So at the end of the day, the social worker and client will share a mutual goal of wanting to help the client become more independent and sustain their improved level of function if it is there. So if you picture somebody transitioning or moving to a different phase, it's either based on them progressing, regressing, or staying the same. As we go through it, the client's treatment and progress into a regression will determine the appropriate clinical decision making process. And if we chose to discharge them out of services, so step 6 is not if they're going to a higher level of care or staying the same. This is if we chose to discharge them successfully at the last phase, which was transitioning. So if they transitioned out of services, we'd then move into follow up and evaluation. So this is where the social worker will reach out to and inquire about the client's current situation to gauge their level of functioning. Have they sustained the progression that they did in services, or did they regress back to old behavior? And if they regress back to old behavior, they may engage back into services, but if they've maintained their progress, they will stay out of services. And that's where we just want to see and check in with people and get feedback and evaluate and follow up specifically with what has gone on within their situation. So the social worker will gather feedback from the client around their experience while in treatment, as well as what post treatment looks like. The social worker will provide additional services as applicable to ensure the client maintains and or has the best level of functioning. The social worker will gauge the effectiveness of services based on the feedback from the client and the client's treatment outcome. So when we're gathering feedback, it's also to amend and change our current progress and or programs to better fit the client's needs that we are currently working with. So the social worker will work with the current system and present results to promote change and impact future client outcomes as needed. But if the client's like, this is 100% what I needed to do, you need to keep doing the same things, it could particularly help at this given moment. So kind of a quick review of what it was like. The first phase and or step in case management is the intake and or screening phase. This is, again, key emphasis on screen. They're trying to get into the screen door, aka into the house. If they have the best possible needs and or they can benefit from services in some way, shape, or form, that is when we are going to start assessing and they start becoming a client, and we need to better understand what we can do to help them get to the best level of functioning. Once we do that, we implement a plan and or identify action steps that they can do to get the job done. We're collaborating with them and we're helping them and empowering them to get the best level of function that they possibly can. After we develop the plan, we're going to implement it. We're going to put an action to it. We're going to do the dang thing. And after they do the dang thing, we're going to have a transition period of, did everything go well? Do you need a higher level of care? Do you need to stay the same? or do you need a lower level of care and or discharge from services in general? And if we chose to discharge them, we're then going to follow up and evaluate specifically, have you continued the progress that you made in services, or have you regressed back? And if so, how do we provide additional services to allow for you to get the job done in some way, shape, or form? So those are a quick summary of the phases of case management, and we'll segue into questions to see how it all ties together. Question 1. A case management social worker is meeting with a 36-year-old female outside in an abandoned building upon referral from an anonymous caller stating someone has been roaming the streets asking people for money. The social worker begins gathering information about the woman regarding her current housing, employment, and supports. Which phase of case management is the woman and social worker currently in? A, screening, B, assessing, C, planning, or D, implementation. And when you have your answer, type the word happy in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it's A. Second place is B. Third place is C. And D. Let's look at it. We're a case management social worker, so that's who we are and what we're doing. We're meeting with a 36-year-old female, so that is our client. We're outside an abandoned building, so that's where the meeting is happening. So we're community-based case management social worker outside an abandoned building, meeting with a 36-year-old female, and it's upon referral of an anonymous caller. And the person was said someone who was outside asking for money. The social worker begins gathering information about the woman regarding her current housing, employment, and supports. So, gathering some initial information about the person. Which phase of case management is the woman and social worker currently in? Let's define each phase, compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, screening is that initial interaction with a person where we begin to gather information to help gauge their appropriateness for treatment. And then assessing is when we gather information about the client after we deem them appropriate for services. So we identify resources, supports, and history, etc. So we deem them appropriate, and then we start gathering that information. Planning is when we identify goals and objectives with the person to help them improve their life in some way. And then implementation is when we execute the identified plan. So let's look back at the question and see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Case management social worker, 36-year-old female, outside an abandoned building. Upon a referral from an anonymous caller, they stated that the person's roaming the streets asking people for money. We begin gathering information about the 36-year-old female that we're meeting outside the abandoned building regarding her current housing, employment, and supports. Keep that all in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C and D. D, why? Because it's way too fast and we haven't really identified the client deemed appropriate for services or what in particular the client would like to work on. So we can't implement something if we don't know who they are, what they're bringing in, and what in particularly they'd like to accomplish. Planning is outside the window because, again, they're not really client working with us and we can't really plan something that would be based on what we think is best with and for their situation. And that's not the goal in particular. It's now in between A, screening, key emphasis on screen, open that screen door for the client to come into services, or B, assessing their needs, who they are, what they're doing, and what we can help them do. So if we look back, it seems like it's our first interaction with them based on the fact that it was a referral from an anonymous caller. The person's not coming on their own fruition or anything like that. So for that reason, we're going to rule out B, even though we are gathering information. The person's not really a client at our agency yet. We'd have to do that initial screening, open that screen door allow for them to become a client within our situation. So the correct answer here is going to be A, screening, because we have to do that initial screen to allow for them to enter services and we deem them appropriate for services in some way, shape, or form. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 2. A social worker in a family agency has been working with a 45-year-old male for 8 months to help him get custody of his children back. The man has a history of alcohol use, and when he used to drink, he was abusive towards his girlfriend and his children. The man has maintained sobriety since being in treatment and has identified positive strategies to help him better handle his anger. The social worker feels the man is ready for discharge. Which phase of case management best explains the man's situation? A, planning, B, implementation, C, follow up and evaluation, or D, transitioning. And when you have your answer, type the word hope in the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is D. Second place is C. Third place is B. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker and a family agency, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're working with a 45-year-old male, so that is our client. For 8 months, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment and has helped him to get the custody of his children back. The man has a history of alcohol use, and when he used to drink, he was abusive towards his girlfriend and his children. The man has maintained sobriety since being in treatment and has identified positive strategies to help him better handle his anger. So, the past 8 months, that's why the length of time is important because it paints the picture. So, since being in treatment is going to be the specifier of his sobriety. And the social worker feels the man is ready for discharge. So, we only feel he's ready. We haven't really discussed it with our client. So, keep that in mind as we break down each phase and compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So planning A is when we identify goals and objectives to help the client or the person improve their life in some way. B, implementation is when we execute the goals and objectives in order to allow for the person to accomplish their identified goal or multiple goals. Follow up and evaluation is when the person is out of treatment and the social worker is gauging their progress or regression. And then transitioning is when the person is preparing for discharge and they are being evaluated on their progress. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, family agency, 45-year-old male, past 8 months, any length of time, hop on top of it because it helps paint the picture of what we're looking at. He engaged in services to help get custody of his children back. He has a history of alcohol use. When he used to drink, he was abusive towards his girlfriend and children. Man has maintained sobriety since being in treatment for the past 8 months. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it helps paint the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. He's identified positive strategies to help him better handle his anger, and we feel he's ready for discharge and haven't really discussed it with him. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because the client hasn't gotten out of services yet. He's still treating with us, and we just feel he is ready for discharge. He's not actually discharged at this given moment. So don't add anything that isn't in the question. We're also going to rule out A. Why? Because he's already identified strategies to help him do it, and he's maintained sobriety for the past 8 months. We're past the planning phase because he's already planned and he's been doing excellent, and we feel he's ready for discharge. Planning would be he's planning to see what he would like to see in his situation. So the important part is he's almost at the tail end of services because we feel he is ready for discharge. So now we're in between B and D. B, implementation, is where he'd be implementing the objectives to accomplish his particular goal, which he has been doing. However, since we feel he's ready for discharge, we're going to rule out B. And the most appropriate thing here would be D, transitioning. Why? Because he's in that transitioning phase of, in this case, he would be going to a lower level of care and or no services. But it could also be to transition to a higher level of care or stay in the same level of care. So he's transitioning out, But the main thing is that we feel he's ready for discharge, so we have to discuss it with him, evaluate his progress, and go from there. So the correct answer here is D. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 3. A community social worker has been working with members of his community to help reduce the amount of human trafficking that occurs in the area. The social worker has formed a partnership with the local hardware stores to provide flashlights and neon green vests to interested members of the community to help reduce the rates of abduction at night. What type of community organizing best explains the social worker's intervention? A, social planning, B, social action, C, locality development, or D, harm prevention. And when you have your answer, type the word Michigan in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is B. Third place is A. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. We're a community social worker, so that's who we are and what our role is. We're working with members of the community, so we have a community organizing program, and we're helping to reduce the amount of human trafficking that occurs in the area. So that is the goal of our particular project. The social worker has formed a partnership with local hardware stores. So we have helped form this partnership, and the hardware stores are going to help provide flashlights and neon green vest to interest members of the community to help reduce rates of abduction at night. So that's the objective in the situation. What type of community organizing best explains the social worker's intervention? Let's define each type of community organizing, compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at. In particular, A, social planning is where a social worker will help out the entire community by initiating resource and or service delivery to help promote change. And the key emphasis here is going to be on planning. So that is where we are going to be emphasizing planning here because the social worker is going to do all the planning. B, social action. This is where a social worker will assume that there is a disadvantaged group of people not getting their needs met, and they will put forth effort to get their needs met. So the key emphasis here is on action. So the social worker is doing all the actions to get this done. C, locality development is where key stakeholders in the community will attempt to bring everyone together to help solve a problem or bridge the gap of a need. And then the key emphasis is on locals. And then D, harm prevention. Phil made this up because there's only 3 types of community organizing. You kind of need some filler there. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Community social worker working with the members of the community help to reduce the amounts of human trafficking that occur in the area. Social worker formed a partnership. The social worker formed a partnership. The social worker formed a partnership. So we help plan it with local hardware stores, but the hardware stores are going to be providing flashlights, neon green vest, and it's going to be going to interested members of the community to help reduce the rates of abduction at night. Keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So, right off the bat, D is going to be ruled out because we are trying to prevent harm, but it's not a type of community organizing. So, we cannot jump in and say, hey, let's word associate and say, just because it says harm and we're trying to prevent that, and that's what the goal of our community organizing project is. Do not jump to answers just because they sound nice. We're also going to rule out locality development. Why? Because yes, it says local hardware stores, plural. So it's multiple stores. So it could be impacting more than just that specific community. And the social worker is going to be involved in this. And it's not an already established program that the locals have done. Locality development is where the local people are going to try and make change happen in their own situation. And the social worker may come in to supplement it. So now we're in between A and B. A, social planning, key emphasis on planning, where the social worker is going to help plan it, but someone else is going to deliver the services and resources to the people. Or D, social action, key emphasis on action, because the social worker is going to be doing all the actions on their own to help bridge the gap for a disadvantaged group of people. So if we look back at the question, the social worker helped form a partnership with the local hardware stores, and they are going to be providing the resources, not the social worker getting it and then delivering it. So again, key emphasis on local hardware stores, plural. So it's impacting multiple groups and multiple communities. So for that reason, we're going to rule out B. Why? Because yes, we are going to be putting forth action, but the local hardware stores are going to be the ones that are delivering the services. So the correct answer here is A, social planning, because the social worker helped plan it, but they are not putting forth the action, and it's not locality development because the locals are involved, but they aren't the ones that came up with the program in particular. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 4. A social worker in an outpatient clinic is asked by a supervisor to investigate their community's current efforts to combat rising rates of overdose deaths. The social worker finds out that there is a group of citizens that have been handing out Narcan and providing informational panels to community members every month. The social worker plans to reach out and contribute to the already established efforts. What type of community organizing would this be considered? A, locality development. B, social planning. C, social action. Or D, community development. And when you have your answer, type the word coffee in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is C. Third place is B. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient clinic, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're asked by our supervisor to investigate the community's current efforts to combat rising rates of overdose deaths. So that is the goal of the approach. The social worker finds out there's a group of citizens that have been handing out Narcan and providing informational panels to the community members every month, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at. So there are monthly meetings of providing information to the community about overdose deaths and how Narcan can be implemented. And the social worker plans to reach out and contribute to already established efforts. What type of community organizing would this be considered? Let's break down each type of community organizing, go from there, and see what we're looking at in particular. A, locality development is where key stakeholders in the community attempt to bring together everyone to help solve a problem or bridge a gap in a need. And the key emphasis is on locals. Why? Because the locals are going to be doing it all on their own. B, social planning is where a social worker will help out the entire community and initiate resource and or service delivery. And the key emphasis here is going to be on planning. Why? Because this is where the social worker is going to plan everything out and someone else is going to deliver it. Social action is where the social worker will assume there is a disadvantaged group of people not getting their needs met and put forth action to help make changes. And the key emphasis here is going to be on action. Why? Because this is where the social worker is going to do all the actions to make sure it gets done. Community development is going to be one that Phil made up. Why? Because there's only 3 types of community organizing. Just because it says community in it and development does not mean it's the right answer. Do not word associate, do not jump to conclusion. But let's look back at our question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Social worker, outpatient clinic, supervisor asked us to investigate the community's current efforts. They asked us to investigate the community's current efforts. So the community's already doing something. And the goal of this entire thing is to combat rising rates of overdoses. We find out that there's a group of citizens, so people already in the community, handing out Narcan and providing informational panels to community members every month. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So this is a monthly occurrence. And then the social worker plans out to reach out and contribute to the already established efforts. So something is already going in the situation, and we're hoping to join them. We're not starting anything. We're not planning anything. We're simply joining something that has already been done. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because it's a made up thing and it's not a type of community organizing. Do not word associate. Do not jump to conclusions. Make sure your answer connects back to the entire question. We're also going to rule out B. Why? Because social planning, we investigated. The community already has something rolling and rocking and rolling. So we can't just join and say we're going to replan this entire thing because it's already established. People are doing it and we're looking to contribute to the already established efforts. So we're not going to be doing the planning and then somebody else carrying it out because they're already carrying it out and they're doing the dang thing. So we're not going to be able to plan something that has already been planned. So now we're in between A, locality development, or C, social action. And it does look like we plan to put forth action. And that's where you could word associate and say social planning as well. But we plan to do something. However, in social action, it's where we assume that there's a disadvantaged group of people and we put forth all of the effort to make sure they get their needs met in some way, shape, or form. So for that reason, we're going to rule out C and we're going to go with A, locality development. Why? Because the locals already, aka the community, has already put forth effort to bridge the gap and combat rising rates of overdoses by handing out Narcan, providing informational panels on a monthly basis, and we plan to contribute to the already established efforts based on the fact the locals have developed and tried to combat things on their own. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 5. A home based social worker is meeting with a couple and their 5-year-old son for the routine monthly appointment. The social worker has been working with the family to help the parents improve their relationship and to help the son address his issues he has been having at school. During the most recent visit, the social worker finds out that the mother has lost her job, which has caused the family to not have enough money to buy food this month. The social worker provides a list of possible food banks in the area for the family to utilize. What type of advocacy best explains the social worker's actions? A, bridging, B, bonding, C, lobbying, or D, collaborating. And when you have your answer, type the word tricky in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're a home based social worker, so that's who we are and where we are doing the meetings. We're meeting with a couple and their 5-year-old son, so it's a family for the routinely monthly visit. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So this happens monthly. The social worker has been working with the family to help the parents improve their relationship and to help the son address the issues he's been having at school. So that's the purpose for them engaging in services during the most recent visit. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the pictures of what we're looking at this given moment. Social worker finds out that the mother has lost her job, which has caused the family to not have enough money to buy food just this month. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So it's a new thing that has arose. Social worker provides a list of possible food banks in the area for the family to utilize. What type of advocacy best explains the social worker's actions? So let's look at each answer choice, compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at this given moment. A, bridging is where we are bringing together loosely connected networks of people to help benefit and satisfy needs in some way. And the key emphasis here is going to be indirect ties, and then bonding is where we are bringing together already established bonds and helping bring about change from their connection. And the key emphasis here is going to be direct ties. And then lobbying is the process of influencing public policy by persuading people of power to influence the situation. And then D, collaborating is working together with people on a common goal. And then Phil just added this in. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: home-based social worker, meeting with a couple and their 5-year-old son, routinely monthly visit, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. We're working with the parents to improve their relationship. We're working with the son to help address the issues he's having at school during the most recent visit. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. Social worker finds out the mother has lost her job, caused the family to not have money to buy food just this month. It's a new issue, so it's something that we have to address and assess right now. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. And then we provide a list of possible food banks in the area for the family to utilize. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because collaborating sounds really, really cool, but we're not collaborating because it's not a type of advocacy. Yes, collaborating with clients is super important and is involved in a lot of interventions, but it's not a type of advocacy. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Providing a list of food banks is not allowing for people of power to change policy to allow for people to gain access to food in general. This is just our particular family that we're working with. So we're not waiting in a lobby for people of power to come by for us to persuade them in any way, shape, or form. So now we're in between A, bridging, or B, bonding. So if you think of bonding, think of people that are already directly interacting with one another. We're just reorienting them and allowing for that connection to fill a void. Bridging, think of two pieces of land that are not connected initially. Adding a bridge connects it and it makes it easier for them to know each other. And if we look back at the question, it's just this month that this has happened. It's never happened in the past. And we provide a list of possible food banks in the area. So it's not a specific one. It's not like, hey, remember when you went back to this food bank in the past? It's a new situation. So for that reason, we're going to rule out B and we are going to go with A, bridging, because we are bridging this mother and this family to a new organization, aka the food bank, and making sure their needs get met by having two things that have indirect ties with one another, connecting them together in order for them to benefit in some way, shape, or form. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 6. A community based social worker has been implementing a program to help reduce the rates of hunger by working with various restaurants in the area for the past year. The social worker will collect the extra food from the restaurants and allow for families to pick up one meal per person and their family. The social worker completed a summative evaluation of the program and found out that the community found the program helpful, yet that transportation is a barrier for them. What is the most likely thing for the social worker to do in this situation? A, complete a needs assessment to better understand the situation before proceeding. B, conduct a focus group with the community members to better understand where they would like to start. C, coordinate with transportation companies in the area to increase the utilization of the food resource. Or D, work with various stakeholders in the community to better understand their perspective of the situation. And when you have your answer, type one positive thing about yourself in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third place is D. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a community-based social worker, so that's who we are and what our role is. We've been implementing a program to help reduce the rates of hunger by working with the various restaurants in the area for the past year. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So it's an established program so far. The social worker will collect extra food from restaurants and allow for families to pick up one meal per person and their family. So it helps supplement food in the community. Social worker completed a summative evaluation. And for those that know what a summative evaluation is, key emphasis on summary. Why? Because it's where we summarize the results of a particular program to see what the gaps are. And it's typically for established programs, which since this has been going on for the past year, it kind of goes right. And we found out the program was helpful, which is good. However, we found that transportation is a barrier for them. What is the most likely thing for the social worker to do in this situation? A, complete a needs assessment to better understand the situation before proceeding. B, conduct a focus group with the community members to better understand where they would like to start. C, coordinate with transportation companies in the area to increase the utilization of the food resource. Or D, work with various stakeholders in the community to better understand their perspective of the situation. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Community-based social worker implementing a program to help reduce the rates of hunger, working with various restaurants in the area for the past year. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. We will collect extra food from restaurants and allow for families to pick one meal up per person in the family. We completed a summative evaluation, which is a part of program evaluation, which is capturing a summary of an already established program to allow for things to help rolling up in this situation. We found out it was helpful for this, and transportation is a barrier for them. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because the summative evaluation already told us what the need was, which is transportation. So we wouldn't conduct a needs assessment within this because it's already been done. The need has already been identified. So we're not just going to do another assessment based on the fact that the evaluation told us particularly what the needs were. So do not just jump to conclusions and say, well, we need to conduct another assessment when we did an evaluation, which accomplished the same goal. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Because it's way too fast. Why? Because we didn't directly interact with the community at all. We did a summative evaluation. They said it was helpful. Transportation's a barrier, but we don't know what they mean in any way, shape, or form. So we're just jumping to conclusions and saying, this is the best intervention for you guys. I'm going to do whatever I feel is best for you. And in community work, we need to focus directly on what the community needs with and for their situation and not walk in and tell them exactly what they need. Same thing with the individual client realm. We meet the client where they're at, allow for them to decide and have the right to self-determination. Same thing in the community. So we're not just going to say, this is what it's going to do. We're going to improve the food utilization based on the fact that transportation is. We're doing it based on our interpretation of what transportation means for the community rather than going directly to them. So now I'm between B and D. B is conduct a focus group. Remember, key emphasis on focus because we're going to group people of the community together, identify what particular focus they'd like to see to better understand where they would like to start. Or D, work with various stakeholders in the community, which are like key leaders of the community to better understand their perspective of the situation. So if we think about it, would it be better to have a focus group with all the community members to better understand where they would like to start, or only talk to the key leaders and say, what do you think is best? So for that reason, we're going to rule out D. We're going to go with B because we need to get the focus of the particular people in our community to see what they would like to see with and for their situation. So we need to meet the community where they're at, not jump to conclusions, not assume, meet them where they're at, start with it where they're at, and then go from there. So the correct answer here is B. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 7. A community-based social worker has been trying to reduce the rate of drug related overdoses in our community. The social worker implemented a self referral based intervention to the members of her community, but recently had to shut down the program due to lack of engagement. The social worker reached out to key stakeholders in the community and they agreed on the already established goals for the program. What should the social worker do next in this situation? A. Reassign the roles of the members on the task force to increase engagement. B. Reevaluate the goals and change them to what will best help the community. C. Change the layout of the program to ensure that it increases the amount of engagement. Or D. Relaunch the current format of the program to help save resources in the long run. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're looking forward to next week. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is B. Third place is A. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. We're a community based social worker, so that's who we are and what our role is. We are trying to reduce the rates of overdose deaths in our community. We implemented a self referral based interventions to the members of the community. So that's what we are trying to do to help reduce the rates of drug related overdoses. Recently, I had to shut down the program. Why? Because there's no engagement with our self referral based intervention. Social worker reached out to key stakeholders in the community. They agreed on the already established goals for the program. They're like, throttle down. We still want you to help reduce the rates of drug related overdoses in the community. What should the social worker do next in this situation? A. Reassign the roles of the members on the task force to increase engagement. B. Reevaluate the goals and change them to what will best help the community. C. Change the layout of the program to ensure that it increases the amount of engagement. Or D. Relaunch the current program format of the program to help save resources in the long run. So keep those in mind as we go look back and see what the question's looking at in particular. So quick review, community-based social worker trying to reduce the rate of drug-related overdoses, implemented a self-referral-based intervention, implemented a self-referral-based intervention. So that's our current format of our program to the members of the community. Got shut down. No one's engaging. We reached out to key stakeholders in the community. So we're like, hey, is this still working for you guys? And they said, yes, please keep the goals, keep trying to help our community. So keep those in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because we're not just going to throttle down and say, yup, I don't have to change. The community is going to have to change. I am doing well with a self-referral based intervention, which means that people have to discover you. You're not really telling anybody about it. They have to walk up to you and say, hey, I know that you have a program, even though you haven't told me. So D is going to be ruled out automatically. We're also going to rule out B. Why? Because the community said, please keep doing this goal, and we're not going to override the community. Why? The community is the main determinant of what our goals should be, because we have to make sure we're satisfying the community because they're the main client within the situation. So we're not going to reevaluate the goals and change what we feel would best help the community, because the community needs to decide that. And they said, yes, please continue trying to reduce the rates of drug-related overdoses. So now we're in between A, reassign the roles of the members on the task force to increase engagement. So do we want to blame our task force team, or do we want to go with C and change the layout of the program to ensure it increases the engagement? So do we want to blame the people implementing it, or do we want to blame the type of format, which is the self-referral based intervention? So for that reason, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because it's not the team's fault. It's the format. So if we changed it to more of like a snowball sampling or active engagement type format, we'd probably be in a better position. So the correct answer is going to be C. Change the layout of the program to ensure it increases the amount of engagement. Based on the fact that we're doing self-referral based intervention, the community wants to continue reducing the rate of drug-related overdoses. Why? Because we reached out to them and they said, please continue doing that. And then it's not our team's fault for not being able to get the job done. It's just the format. So the correct answer here is C. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 8. A community-based social worker has been completing research around how to reduce the rates of domestic violence in his community. The social worker completed a needs assessment and found transportation, shelter, and childcare are barriers to people seeking out and staying in domestic violence services. During a focus group that the social worker hosted, he found out the members of the community do not want to increase the availability of domestic violence resources. What should the social worker do next in this situation? A, develop goals and objectives for the expansion of domestic violence resources in the community. B, develop a task force team to carry out the program to help increase the availability of domestic violence resources in the community. C, review previous efforts of expanding domestic violence resources in the community to increase the likelihood of a successful program. Or D, reach out to stakeholders in other communities to implement our proposed program. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're blessed to have in your situation right now. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is D. Third place is B. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a community-based social worker, so that's who we are and what our role is. We've been completing research around how to reduce the rates of domestic violence in his community. So he's like, this is something that I want to look into. We completed a needs assessment and found transportation, shelter, and childcare are barriers to people seeking out domestic violence services. So during a focus group, again, getting groups of people in the community together to create a focus, and we found out they do not want to increase the availability of domestic violence resources. What should the social worker do next in this situation? A, develop goals and objectives for the expansion of domestic violence resources in the community. B, develop a task force team to carry out the program to help increase the availability of domestic violence resources in the community. C, review previous efforts of expanding domestic violence resources in the community to increase the likelihood of a successful program. Or D, reach out to stakeholders in other communities to implement our proposed program. So keep those answers in mind as we look back at the question. So, quick review: community based social worker completed research around how to reduce the rates of DV in his community. We completed a needs assessment, found out transportation, shelter, and childcare are barriers to people seeking out and staying in services once they're there. During a focus group, so we're getting people of the community together to see what particular focus they would like to have. We found out they do not want to increase the availability of DV resources in their community. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice again. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A and B. Why? A is assuming that the community wants to go ahead. They said, we do not want to increase the availability. And the main determinant of what we do with and for our situation in community work is the community. They said, we don't want this. So we're not going to develop goals and objectives for us to expand the community because they don't want it. And B is going to be incorrect because the task force team comes after we develop the goals and objectives. And if we're not able to develop the goals and objectives because the community's like, we don't want this, we're not going to force something down and say, yup, you guys need this. I know what's best for you based on my research. Again, we have to shut it down if we do not have it. So now we're in between C, review previous efforts of expanding domestic violence resources in the community to ensure the likelihood of a successful program, or D, reach out to stakeholders in other communities to implement our proposed program. So if you look back, he wants to focus on his community in particular. They said they don't want it. So are we going to go to other communities, or are we going to look at what happened prior to this to see what could make the community not want to have this go on? So that way we can go back to the community and say, hey, these are some previous things that went on. Here are different things that my program is going to do that these other ones didn't. So the correct answer is going to be C, and we're going to rule out D. We're going to rule out D. Why? Because we're not going to another community based on the fact that our focus is on his community or this community in particular. So we do not want to divert away, or we don't want to force our community to do something. But the best way to improve our program or to allow for the community to know that we're on their side is to see what happened in the past. So the correct answer here is C. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 9. A community based social worker has been trying to establish a drug prevention program for the youth in his community due to a recent overdose death of a 14-year-old female. The social worker has been receiving support from multiple businesses, organizations, families, and youth in the area. The social worker has collaborated with multiple stakeholders in the community, and they've agreed to build a community center for youth to engage in social activities that do not involve alcohol or drug use. What would be the next step for the social worker to complete to develop the drug prevention program? A, complete a needs assessment to better understand the situation before proceeding. B, solidify the goals and objectives for the community center to ensure that the community's efforts are focused. C, open the community center to the youth to allow for them to provide feedback on ways to change it to better fit their needs. Or D, develop a task force team to begin gathering resources and delivering services to the youth in the community. And when you have your answer, type your favorite quote in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're community based social workers, so that's who we are and what our role is. And we're trying to establish a drug prevention program for the youth in his community. So that is what we're particularly trying to do. And it was predicated on an overdose death of a 14-year-old female. The social worker has been receiving support from multiple businesses, organizations, families, and youth in the area. So there is a rapport established. The social worker has collaborated with multiple stakeholders in the community, and they've agreed to build a community center for the youth for them to engage in social activities that do not involve alcohol or drug use. What would be the next step for the social worker to complete the drug prevention program? A, complete a needs assessment to better understand the situation before proceeding. B, solidify the goals and objectives for the community center to ensure that the community's efforts are focused. C, open the community center to the youth to allow for them to provide feedback on ways to change it to better fit their needs. Or D, develop a task force team to begin gathering resources and delivering services to the youth in the community. Keep those in mind as we look back at the question. So, quick review: community based social worker trying to establish a drug prevention program for the youth in the community due to A recent overdose death of a 14-year-old female. We've been receiving support from people in the community. We have that rapport established. We collaborated with multiple stakeholders in the community. They've agreed to build the community center. So they've only agreed to build it. It's not established yet, and we don't have any of the nuts and bolts about it, but they agreed to build it. So keep that in mind as we go through the answer choices again. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C and D. We're going to rule out D. Why? Because they simply agreed to build it. We don't have any goals. We don't have any objectives. We don't have anything. We don't understand how we're going to do this. They simply said, yes, we want to do this. So we can't develop a task force team because we don't have goals and objectives to execute. And we can't open the community center because it's not built yet. They simply agreed to build it. So now we're in between A, complete a needs assessment to better understand the situation. And a needs assessment helps us identify one particular we have, what strengths, what resources we currently have, what we need to do to bridge the gap in order to establish and build a community center. Or D is like, let's solidify the goals and objectives to ensure we're focused. So if we look back at the question, people are given us support. So we have rapport established. They've agreed to build the community center, but no one's saying how much they're going to contribute, who's going to do what in particularly we're looking at. So we don't even know if we have a building, how much money we have, or anything. People are simply saying, yeah, that's a really good idea. So now we need to assess and address particularly what we want to do. So we have the support and rapport established. And the next step after we have that rapport established is to assess particularly what we need. So for that particular reason, we're going to rule out B and go with A. A is saying, okay, you guys agreed to build this. Let's assess particularly how we can get the job done. And then we started establishing the goals and objectives and what particularly can get done. But do not jump to conclusions too fast, because at the end of the day, the process is establish that rapport, assess, then we develop the goals and objectives, then we develop the task force team, then we solidify the action plan and get the job done. And then the final is execute and evaluate. So this particular situation would be a needs assessment. What particularly do we need to build this community center? Who's going to pay for what? And how can we get the job done? So for that reason, the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 10. A social worker in an outpatient clinic has been working with clients that struggle with addictions for the past 2 years. Throughout her work, she's realized a decent amount of clients have had the same concern of not being able to afford food to feed themselves and their children. The lack of food has caused her clients to go without meals for the past 3 months. The social worker has surveyed her clients' interest in utilizing a food bank if there was one at her agency. Most clients were interested. What should the social worker do next to organize a food bank at her agency? A. Continue to gauge the interest of her clients to ensure that the food bank would not go to waste. B. Reach out to various grocery stores and people in her community to begin collecting food for the food bank. C. Develop a schedule for the food bank to better inform her clients on how they can utilize the food bank. Or D. Gather feedback from her clients regarding their experience with the food bank to make the needed changes for the future. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you learned from the session tonight. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third place is D. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker and outpatient clinic, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're working with clients that struggle with addiction, so those are our clients of interest. For the past 2 years, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. Throughout her work, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. She's realized a decent number of clients have had the same concern. They're not able to afford food to feed themselves and their children, so their children aren't getting food. The lack of food has caused her clients to go without meals. So now we're trying to supplement this. So for the past 3 months, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. Social workers surveyed her clients' interest in utilizing a food bank, and they said, we're interested if you have one. What should the social worker do next to organize a food bank at her agency? A, continue to gauge the interest of her clients to ensure that the food bank would not go to waste. B, reach out to various grocery stores and people in her community to begin collecting food for the food bank. C, develop a schedule for the food bank to better inform her clients on how they can utilize the food bank. Or D, gather feedback from her clients regarding their experience with the food bank to make the needed changes for the future. Keep those in mind as we look back at the question. So, quick review: social worker, outpatient clinic. So, that's who we are and where we're at. We're working with clients who struggle with addictions for the past 2 years. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment throughout our work. So, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So, for the past 2 years, she's realized a decent number of people have had the same concern, not being able to afford food, caused them and their children not to be able to eat. And for the past 3 months, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. We started to survey our clients. If we had a food bank, would you utilize it? They're like, yes, please. We're super interested. We want to stop going without meals. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because we already have interest. We already have rapport, and our clients are like, yes, please. We need these services. Please help us out. So we're not going to continue asking them, do you want a food bank? Do you want a food bank? Because now we're just kind of toying with the clients. It's not a good idea. Bad moves, bad vibes. We're also going to rule out D. Why? Because we haven't established the food bank yet. So we can't say, hey, so what was it like for you to utilize the food bank? Why? Because we surveyed them and we need to organize the food bank. It's not established yet. So we can't say, hey, what was your experience? That's way too fast. Slow down, slap the brakes, make sure you're reading the question and comparing your answer back to the question to make sure they connect. So now we're in between B, reach out to various grocery stores and people in our community to begin collecting food, or C, develop a schedule for the food bank to better inform her clients on how they can utilize the food bank. So if you think about it, we have planned to organize it. We haven't completely organized it yet. So for that reason, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because if we're going to establish a program, we have to be able to, one, have food, two, be able to sustain the program. So for that reason, we're going to go with B. The correct answer is reach out to various grocery stores and people in the community to begin getting food for the food bank. So we need to get the food to make sure that we have food so that way we can give it to the clients. Because at the end of the day, we're still organizing it. And the first step is to get interest and rapport and interest. So that after that, we need to be able to gather the resources together in order to be able to deliver it. So we can't develop a schedule if we don't have the food because we don't want to have a false persona. D, it's not implemented yet. A, we already have enough interest. So the correct answer here is B. So that's how we look at that question in particular.